Let's talk about a woman who made the Nazis lose sleep at night. They called her the White Mouse because she kept slipping through their fingers. But honestly, that nickname doesn't do her justice. She didn't just escape them, she made their lives hell. This is the story of Nancy Wake, a woman who punched a Gestapo officer in the face, led deadly sabotage missions, and cycled 500 kilometers just to make sure the war effort didn't fall apart. Strap in, because this one's wild. The thing about war is that it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a soldier, a spy, or just someone trying to go about their business. It'll pull you in whether you like it or not. And if you do decide to fight back, well, you better be damn good at it. Nancy Wake, she wasn't just good, she was the spanner in the works for the Nazis. Growing up in Australia, she wasn't exactly the type to sit around waiting for life to happen. By the time she was in her 20s, she'd seen more of the world than most people do in a lifetime. Working as a journalist and getting a front row seat to the rise of the Nazis in the 1930s, most people would have taken that as a sign to keep their head down. Nancy, she decided that if the Nazis wanted to fight, she'd give them one. Her work in occupied France started small, smuggling messages, helping downed airmen escape, that sort of thing. But small things add up fast when you're annoying the Third Reich. The Gestapo had a special name for her, the White Mouse, because she kept slipping through their fingers, and let's be clear, this wasn't some cute game of cat and mouse. The Nazis weren't the type to give you a slap on the wrist if they caught you. They had a price on her head so high, she probably could have turned herself in and retired somewhere nice if it meant the Nazis had a break from her shenanigans indefinitely. That wasn't her style though. Instead, she made a run for it. Fleeing France was easier said than done, involving a trek across the Pyrenees that would have left most people sobbing in their boots. But she got out, made it to Britain, and instead of thinking, well, I've done my bit, she signed up for more. The Special Operations Executive, SOE for short, took one look at her and went, yeah, she'll do. Training was brutal, designed to weed out anyone who couldn't hack it. Some of the blokes in her group underestimated her, until she flattened them in combat training. She could shoot, she could fight, and she could drink most of them under the table. By the time they were done, she wasn't just some resistance courier anymore. She was a fully trained saboteur with a license to ruin Nazi plans in every way possible. In 1944, she parachuted back into France, which, by the way, she did after knocking back a few drinks to calm her nerves, because apparently, dropping out of a plane into enemy territory wasn't enough of an adrenaline rush on its own. And of course, she's got Australian blood. She landed in the Auvergne region, linking up with the local resistance fighters, the Marquis. They were tough as nails but needed help. Supplies, training, leadership, the whole package. And Nancy, she stepped up. But let's talk about one of the most ridiculous high-stakes parts of her story. The time she had to cycle 500 kilometers to save an entire resistance network. Because, of course, a woman who'd already punched a Gestapo officer in the face, smuggled hundreds of people out of danger, and carried coded messages under Nazi noses, just had to throw in a Tour de France for good measure. See, things had gone sideways when resistance radio operator got caught. No radio, no way to call for help. And suddenly, the whole network was dangling by a thread. So what did Nancy do? She got on a bicycle and pedalled like the entire Third Reich was on her tail. For 3 days, she rode through mountains, past enemy patrols, barely stopped for rest. No sleep, no stops, just her bike, and a desperate need to get the job done. And this wasn't some casual Sunday ride. We're talking dirt tracks, steep inclines, and roads teeming with soldiers who'd have shot her on sight. She made it, of course she did. And because of that, the resistance got new radios, new weapons, and a renewed chance at survival. The woman had calves of steel and nerves to match. The Nazis knew something was up, and they weren't the type to sit back and let the resistance have their fun. They sent in thousands of troops to flush them out. That's when things got brutal. The Marquis were outgunned and outnumbered, And when the fighting started, it was dirty, desperate, and terrifying. And Nancy, she was right in the thick of it. One night, their camp was attacked. Chaos everywhere. Gunfire, shouting, smoke filling the air. Nancy didn't hesitate. She grabbed the Sten gun and joined the fight. And this wasn't some token effort. She was taking out Nazis like she'd been born for it. The Marquis saw her standing there, bullets flying, and knew they weren't backing down. If their leader was still fighting, so were they. It wasn't just the combat skills that made her a problem for the Nazis. It was her ability to think on her feet. When they captured a local resistance fighter and threatened to torture him for information, she didn't just sit around hoping for a miracle. She marched straight to the officer in charge and shot him in the face. Just like that, problem solved. That's the kind of person she was. No hesitation, no second guessing. If something needed doing, she did it. By this point, the Gestapo must have been tearing their hair out. She was leading ambushes, blowing up bridges, derailing trains. Every time they thought they had her, she slipped away. The war was turning, but she wasn't slowing down. The Marquis were fighting like demons, but the Nazis weren't done yet. If they had their way, there wouldn't be a resistance left to celebrate victory. And then, things took a turn. The kind where even the toughest people have to face the possibility that they might not get out alive. Nancy and her fighters were preparing for the next mission when the sky darkened. Not with storm clouds, but with German planes. The sound of engines rolled over the hills like a warning, and when the bombs started falling, explosions tore through the landscape. Dirt and fire erupting in the air. She hit the ground, ears ringing, as the world turned into blur of chaos. The Germans had obviously reached boiling point. They wanted the Marquis wiped off the map, and they were bringing everything they had to do it. The bombing was just the start. Within hours, German troops were moving in, sweeping the countryside, hunting down every last resistance fighter. Nancy had been in close calls before, but this was something else. She scrambled through the woods, dodging patrols and listening to gunfire in the distance. Every few minutes, another explosion would shake the ground. Some of her men had already been captured. She knew what that meant. There were no prisoners of war camps for people like them, only torture, execution, and a quick trip to the unmarked grave. The plan had to change. Staying in one place meant death. They had to split up, vanish into the landscape, and regroup when it was safe. She gave orders quickly, telling her fighters to scatter and blend in with the locals, and then she ran. For days, she moved through the forests and villages, never staying in one place too long. She relied on farmers and villagers who were brave enough to hide her, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the Germans caught her scent again. Every road was dangerous, every moment had to be calculated. Then, a breakthrough. Word came that Allied forces were pushing through France. The war was shifting, and if they could just hold on just that little longer, they might survive this. But survival wasn't enough for Nancy. She wanted to make sure the Nazis paid for every second of fear they'd inflicted. With what was left of her team, she launched one final campaign of sabotage, blowing up supply lines, ambushing convoys, cutting off communications. The Germans were already losing, but Nancy made sure they lost harder. And then, just like that, it was over. France, liberated. The Nazis were in retreat. Nancy, the woman who'd spent years fighting, running, and risking her life every turn, had won. They never did catch her, not once. The white mouse had slipped through their fingers every single time. And in the end, it wasn't the Gestapo, the SS, or the entire Nazi war machine that stopped her. It was peace. By the time the war ended, Nancy Wake had racked up more kills and more successful missions and more headaches for the Nazis than most full-scale military units. The woman wasn't just a resistance fighter, she was an absolute force of nature. After the war, she wasn't exactly showered with gratitude. She tried to get involved in politics, but people didn't know what to do with a woman like her. She didn't fit the quiet, polite mold they expected. Imagine surviving years of Nazi occupation, leading soldiers and dodging execution, only to be told to sit down and be more ladylike. But Nancy didn't care. She lived her life exactly how she wanted, never apologising for the war she fought or the men she killed. When asked about her wartime exploits, she once said, "I was never afraid, I just got angry." That sums her up really. The Nazis took everything from her, so she made it her mission to take everything from them, and she did it with a smirk, a pistol, and no fear. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse, the nightmare of Gestapo, and possibly the toughest woman to ever walk through occupied France. Or cycle for that matter. And that, my friends, is the story of Nancy Wake, one of the most hardcore resistant fighters to ever exist. No super soldier serum, just pure guts and unshakable hatred for Nazis. If this was a film, you'd probably say it was too far-fetched, but no, this was just Nancy's reality, and somehow she made it out the other side. Absolute legend. Makes you wonder how many other stories like this are out there. People who should be household names but aren't. If you know of any, drop them in the comments, because I'm always up for a good tale of historical badassery. Cheers for sticking around, and I'll catch you in the next one.